We are going to be looking at groups which are often overlooked in history, the ordinary people. Now, Whitechapel is a real tale of two cities, middle classes who can flourish, but just behind these streets are people who live in extreme poverty, without homes or hopes of getting out of the cycle of poverty. So the East End of London is a vibrant working class area which relies upon the river and the docks for many of their opportunities. It's close to the West End, heavily polluted. Gases from factories upriver engulf Whitechapel, making it a highly unhealthy and dangerous place to live. Whitechapel, as you can see, is located near the Tower of London and the infamous model prison of Pentonville. We're returning to our examination of the industrial era in the reign of Queen Victoria, to a district which has 30,000 inhabitants with roughly 4,000 houses, seeing massive overcrowding and a large population being in poverty, with roughly about 1,000 people being homeless. Gangs rule the streets. A recent influx of immigrants has caused Londoners to become hostile to the Irish and the Jewish immigrants, who they believe are taking their jobs, despite the economic slowdown in the world causing a recession. Whilst in 1888, a series of 5 murders put Whitechapel on the map. The notorious Jack the Ripper seems to have already take high levels of crime to a new level, capturing that attention of the rich and poor across the world. So, ordinary people then often don't leave many records behind, but this period of history enables us to delve much deeper into their lives and than we have done before. This is thanks to the work of historians such as Hayley Rubenhold in the 5, which is in the library, and we can find out lots about people and their circumstances of their lives. So who are we going to be looking at? We're going to be looking at Londoners, okay? People who feel like they can feel better about themselves by looking down at other races, whilst blaming them for their own situation. And now this is a really useful tool for those in government to distract from the real causes of poverty. So immigrants are our next group. So in 1845, potato plants in fields across Ireland started turning black and rotten. The potato crop failure was even greater next year and for the next 3 years after that. So blight destroyed leaves and roots, and these crops are the main source of income. So landlords and farmers turned them out as they couldn't pay their rent, and many people died of starvation. Ireland, being ruled by Great Britain, followed Victorian values, which meant that they don't believe that they should actually help the poor. Helping the poor would leave them to be idle and not working for a living. So as many as 2 million people emigrate from Ireland. London is one of their first stops on the ships on the way to other countries, but often by that time many have run out of money and need to stay and work. So they get stuck in this cycle of poverty. Now there are Irish born in London as well, and this reaches its peak in 1851. And the census counts the number at 109,000. So generally, Irish navvies, which also means navigators, are used as cheap labour to build railways, canals, and other kind of really heavy, hard work. Health and safety is limited, and people really look down upon the Irish, likening them to apes. Drunkenness often gets very violent, and there's a massive amount of discrimination against this group of people. So this discrimination and the opposition to the government leads to a terrorist group called the Fenians, who are intent on disrupting society, emerging in Whitechapel. The Jewish immigrants flee anti-Semitism facing them in Russia. Alexander III has introduced the May Laws, which place heavy restrictions upon their lives. They face pogroms whipped up by the Tsars. This is where they encourage gangs and Russians to beat up, kill and destroy Jewish areas, directing hatred and blame for the problems facing the people of Russia. Many flee westwards to places such as Poland, but are still persecuted in Poland and Germany and flee further westwards. Some arrived in Britain and end up forming large communities in places such as Golders Green in the East End. And by 1888, the population has grown really significantly, with some streets being 95% Jewish. So culturally, Jews find it really hard to assimilate, to become like the population, which divides them from other parts of the community and ends up causing hostility between them. And the Pall Mall Gazette records in 1886 that the foreign Jews of no nationality whatever are becoming a pest and a menace to the poor native-born East Ender. So linking very much with the rhetoric that we hear today. As we know from earlier studies of Robert Peel, a new police force has been introduced in 1829. The people of London do not trust this police force, as most people need to resort to crime to survive. The communities are not cooperative and highly suspicious of the police, which puts them in a real disadvantage when trying to investigate the murders from Jack the Ripper. Whitechapel is on the border of two police forces. So mainly it's dealt with by the City of London Police. And then Metropolitan Police obviously are the bordering police force. And forces compete and don't share information, which makes it really hard in the murder of Jack the Ripper to actually get proper information. Detective forces, the CID, have been introduced, but there's been a corruption scandal and there are too few police realistically and too many crimes. We're also going to be looking at the major problems of poverty, including where opportunities really are there to lift yourself out of poverty, the health and the living conditions of residents. We're going to be looking at gangs, and we're going to be looking at help available to the homeless and to the orphans. So you can see here a wealthy Victorian family, and their idea is that there's no real need for the wealthy to interfere in the lives of the poor. Okay, the Industrial Revolution brings this time of entrepreneurship, and people feel like it's their time now and everybody has the opportunity to make money. They don't really face the same problems as the poor, and it's only really when Prince Albert dies in 1861 from typhoid that some of the wealthier people realise they need to deal with some of the problems facing the poor because it's impacting them as well. So as we know from our studies of prisons, reformers such as Elizabeth Fry and John Howard campaigned to improve conditions for prisons, or people in prisons, and this is similar with people interested in the lives of the poor. So we've got a lot of philanthropists who are looking to help improve the lives of the poor. So one of these people is Charles Booth. And he left us with a great legacy to find out about the lives of the poor. And he starts to chart the poverty in London. He creates a really useful resource for us to use, which categorises the level of wealth in areas. So we can see along the main streets of Whitechapel then that there are middle classes, as there are many businesses. But behind the picture, when you look a bit closer, there are many blue and black areas where the poorest actually live. So there are many useful sources of information about life in Whitechapel. We have the census. So every 10 years, it's our requirement to fill out a census. This leaves the government with information of who is in which house, on which day, what their occupation is and what their age is. So this can tell us a lot about the population of Whitechapel. How many people are crammed into overcrowded areas, how many people are homeless as well. Shipping records. So as I talked to you earlier about the immigrants, so with our shipping records, we will find out people who have come in, where they've come from, what jobs they had and what ages they had and whether they had families. For crime, we'll find out about police records, court records, freedom licences where people are released from prison, how long they've been, where they're well behaved. Memoirs and reports. Now, memoirs tend to be of wealthy people because obviously the average person is illiterate, so they can't read or write in Whitechapel at this time. But reports from police, reports from the Home Office, which talk to us about the situation, and often it's not in their interest to lie in these things. It obviously in a memoir it is to exaggerate your participation, so it makes you look better. And the media. So Whitechapel is filled with penny dreadfuls. These are our tabloids of today. So these are often drawn so people can access them and sensationalise and scandalise what is going on in Whitechapel. So it is easy to find out about ordinary people in Whitechapel, and we're going to take that further and find out what their experiences were.